Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Start the Conversation about Drug Use Part 2. We will begin our program in approximately 3 minutes. All right. Good evening, everyone. Our program will begin. I'd like to introduce Rita Nafis.
Welcome to part 2, Start the Conversation about Drug Use. My name is Rita Nafis, and I'm Vice President of Social and Cultural at Sephardic Temple. Thank you for joining us tonight as we continue this critical conversation and bring visibility to the threats impacting our youth and the challenges we as parents face. Last week, we heard from Noah Mann, a certified professional life coach who started his journey with drug and alcohol addiction and the lessons from his journey with parents and teens. The recording of that webinar is on our website at sephardictemple.org. If you missed part 1, we encourage that parents and teens watch together. Tonight, we will hear from a panelist of therapists on several important topics, including normalization of substance abuse amongst teens, the role of peer groups and social circles, amongst other factors that impact our youth. Feel free to use the Q&A chat section to enter your questions. Please also enter your email addresses in the chat area so that we may send you more information and resources that are available to families. On our panel tonight, we welcome Laudan Gish, a licensed clinical social worker who earned both her master's degree in social welfare and pupil personal services credentials from UCLA. Laudan has completed extensive postgraduate specialization training in co-occurring mood disorders, eating disorders, substance use disorders, trauma, crisis management, and perinatal mental health. And she provides psychotherapy and coach services in English and Farsi. We also welcome Jessie Larcella, a licensed marriage and family therapist and somatic experiencing practitioner. Over the course of the past decade, Jessie has helped run some of the most well-regarded adolescent dual diagnostic programs in the Los Angeles area. Jessie's area of clinical focus are trauma, anxiety, depression, addiction, codependency, family systems, and the process of individuation. We also welcome Corbett Miller, a licensed clinical social worker and somatic experiencing practitioner. As a somatic experiencing practitioner, Corbett brings a deeper awareness and insight into functioning of our nervous system. Disruptions in our system can relate to problems including anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. He graduated from CSULA's School of Social Work and has been a primary therapist at several of Los Angeles' top residential and outpatient treatment centers. And lastly, we welcome back Roxana Yeshuafar Aboudi, a licensed clinical social worker who led our question and answer segment with Noah Mann last week. Roxana began her work as a mental health clinician providing psychotherapy and life coaching, specializing in treatment of trauma, addiction, and codependency among adolescents, young adults, and family. Roxana is well trained in multiple groups and individual psychotherapeutic modalities, including cognitive behavior therapy, psychodynamic therapy, and anger management. Over the last 10 years, Roxana has focused her work on substance abuse in both inpatient and outpatient treatment settings. We look forward to hearing from all of our experts tonight. But first, I would like to introduce Raymond Yeshuafar, President of Sephardic Temple, and Rabbi Sakai, Executive Director of STAR.
Thank you, Rita. Welcome everyone to part 2 of our session tonight. This is a very important topic to all of us. I personally have 2 teenage kids and a 10-year-old, so it touches home with what's going on in our community and what's going on in our world today. I want to thank our therapists here once again, and also thank Noah Mann for his presentation last week that opened our doors and our eyes to a new conversation to have with our kids and to be able to discuss it openly without any walls or boundaries. So with tonight, hopefully the therapists will instruct us and teach us as parents what to do, what to look for, and how we can get help if that need ever comes about. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. And Rabbi Sakai, I will pass it on to you.
Shalom, everybody. Thank you so much, Raymond. Thank you very much, Rita. I once again want to welcome everyone. Mr. Jesse, Ms. Ladan, Roxana, once again, welcome back. Thank you so much. Raymond, thank you for the introduction. And Mr. Corbett Miller, thank you for all of you joining tonight, helping us out in this journey that we will take together with all the parents. I was looking at all the participant lists, and I'm so happy to see a lot of familiar names from our community, which means that we, Baruch Hashem, thank God, we have a lot of people that do care. Even though this subject might have not been so open in the past in our community, and a lot of people, especially in the Persian Sephardic community, it might be a taboo to talk about it. You know, no one wants to agree or admit that these problems exist, but unfortunately, it's in the open and it does exist and we need to talk about it. And I'm so happy to have such professionals with us that will open our eyes about what's out there and what possibilities there are out there for parents, what resources there are for parents at hand. Just one thing that I wanted to share with everyone. This is something that I was talking to with a few parents, especially since the last webinar that we had on this subject with Noah, that a lot of parents had a lot of trouble bringing their kids because the last webinar was for teens and parents along. And parents were telling me how much trouble they had trying to get their teens to come and sit with them. And me dealing with the kids all the time, dealing with these teens all the time, I know how difficult it was. And my message to you is, if you got your teen to sit with you throughout that webinar, even if you got their eyes rolling at you the entire time, kudos to you. Hazaku Baruch. That is how it has to be done. And I'm sure on a professional level, the professionals tonight will discuss that as well, as to what it takes for parents to actually get involved. I mean, I've said this many times on a synagogue platform. I want to share it with you as well tonight. You know, today's day and age, a lot of parents talk about, you know, what they like to call hands-off parenting, you know, letting kids experiencing life for themselves, leaving kids alone to experience things. And sometimes, unfortunately, I've even heard parents saying, hey, I tried some stuff with my kids to let them know that we're friends. But I'm not even going to talk about this on a professional level. I'm just going to talk about it on a Jewish level, okay? There is a reason why parents are called parents and kids are called kids. You're supposed to be parents. Most of the times, kids are not looking for friends. They're looking for parents. So what I usually call the whole hands-off thing, or letting kids experiencing for themselves, and this means, I mean no offense to anybody, I simply call it, it's lazy parenting. That's all it is. You're just being lazy. You just don't want to get your hands dirty. You don't want to get that attitude. You don't want to deal with what's actually happening. So many times parents don't want to confront their teens and their kids about what they're involved in. And unfortunately, when it completely gets out of hand, that's when people like the panelists for tonight have to get involved. And unfortunately, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes it might even be too late. So why let it come to that? We have to wear the parent's shoes, wear that suit that a parent has to wear really in life, and get involved with our kids and see what it takes to confront our kids. And as the panelists will tell tonight, and as Noah spoke about it last time, it's not always with harshness. It has to be with love. It has to be with, sometimes I tell parents, to deal with your kids, you gotta be politicians. You gotta know what things to say, what things not to say. And hopefully tonight, we will cover those things. But first things first, the conversation's open now. I think the most important thing for parents to know now is that the hands-off thing, it does not work. The parents have to actually work on teaching their kids what it will take to survive and thrive in society, not just experiencing things on their own. Because if they don't know, unfortunately, as we've seen in past, a lot of kids tend to make a lot of huge mistakes. Sometimes, you know, things that they can't even take back. So I want to welcome everyone. I want to once again thank all the panelists, and I will give it over to you. Thank you. Roxana, you're on.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Roxana Yeshuafar Aboudi. I'm a licensed clinical social worker who's been providing psychotherapy services to residents of the LA community. I was asked to participate in this panel to foster a safe environment to learn about something that is becoming more and more prevalent in our youth: substance abuse. Recreational drug use is something that we see thousands of youth dabble with, but being able to identify when it turns into problematic substance abuse is crucial. We commonly see that during the high school years, curiosity and peer influence are more pressing. Societal and familial pressure to be perfect and get into college is often increased, and social partying becomes more frequent, which can lead to recreational drug use. We are noticing that as it is getting easier to access alcohol and drugs, youth are also starting to experiment with it at a younger age. Having an overarching zero tolerance for drugs and alcohol is not always the realistic option for every family. Having an open and honest dialogue is necessary to a teen's health and development, as well as empowering them to become better choice makers. I hope that with tonight's discussion from our expert panel of clinicians, parents feel that they are not alone in this process and to learn how to seek help when in need. As our panelists are speaking tonight, I invite you to send in your questions through the chat option for our Q&A portion of this event so that we can answer them. And now I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers, Laudan, Jessie, and Corbett.
Thank you, Roxana. I'll get started if that's all right with my other colleagues. I didn't realize I was the only MFT here, so thankfully we have at least somebody who practices a good.
Glad somebody showed
first
up.
off, we all know each other very well. We're good friends and colleagues. So this is fun and interesting for us as professionals. So it feels really nice to be here, not only with people, you know, who I deeply respect as professionals, but who I would also consider friends and folks I always look forward to seeing. So this is really nice and pretty unexpected. We wrote down a few things and there's already a few questions. My name is Jessie Larcella. Myself and Corbett Miller are business partners. We own and operate an outpatient facility that tends to adolescents, young adults, and this is pretty specifically some of the material we deal with is substance use, trauma, mood disorders, and we'll talk a little bit more about how all those things kind of overlap and interrelate. And Roxana was being humble, but we have the wonderful gift of working with her as well in our outpatient, and she is a very highly qualified and very gifted clinician as well. And LaDan, we know from other professional circles, and is also a huge gift to this field. Should we answer the questions? I don't really know.
I thought might be nice we had some good talking points, and maybe we could start off having an open dialogue between us four about those things, and then parents, it might answer some of the questions they already have, and then we can go to the questions afterwards.
Cool.
Great.
So as Corbett will tell anyone who will listen, I have a propensity to overtalk, so I don't want to say too much.
This time I'm okay with it. I don't have anywhere to be. I blocked this out for the evening. I'm gonna let Jessie roll. But really, Jessie, you did come up with the talking points that I think are going to give us a great kind of structure to just begin to have like our own sharing and our own flow of information that hopefully the parents will find valuable, and it might answer some questions and it'll probably spur some other questions up. And so I think that might be a better way to start.
So they're not really in any specific order, these talking points. I just want to say that first. And one of the ones though, I put it first because I do think it's something just anecdotally that we come across so often, which is the normalization of substance use and alcohol use with teens.
You heard the rabbi mention it it's like it's such an important thing, and I think it's one thing that, like, as a society and culturally, people just don't kind of grasp how important how impactful that piece is to the kids' development and their relationship to substances.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
And specifically, we're talking about how, and it kind of answers the questions we see, like at what point is it natural curiosity that comes with that age as their peers are starting to use or experiment, and when is it, or what are the signs, or when is it too much? But first, we kind of want to talk about the normalization of use, that it's prevalent. People are playing around and it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, like if you talk to, so like even just kind of if we were to poll some of the parents that we've worked with historically, I think you'd find that most of them would say that every one of their kids' friends drinks or uses some sort of, substance. And so therefore it's kind of what, we hear this a lot. What do you expect them to do? What do you expect? And to be honest, it's a fair question. What do you expect? And what is the litmus for crossing that? And I think that is one of the questions that someone had asked, like, what is the litmus for crossing that line in the sand between, look, I'm being a normal, teenager and trying to find my place in the world and who I am, and then crossing this line into engaging in some behavior that's dangerous, that's, that's really compensatory in some ways to, settle and find some semblance of inner balance, which is where it starts to get problematic. And we've got that one a little later down, but
I think it's interesting. I'm sorry, LaDan.
There you go.
I think it's interesting because this question comes up with families so often, and oftentimes they're looking to us for like a clear, concrete, like answer. And much of this is about the process of the family kind of coming to a place of, what makes sense for them, what boundaries they're willing to kind of hold. But also, I think that there becomes a clarity. Oftentimes, that a family will overlook substance use, like perceived possible substance use, if the grades are okay, if the kid is like not getting in, like is not behaviorally getting problematic. But then the moment those things slip, then the family is like, "Whoa, you got to stop smoking pot. You can't smoke, you can't vape anymore." But the message to that point has always been like, it's okay as long as you perform. But now you can't, and that's a really difficult scenario that families things get created that way. So
you just brought up a really good point, Corbett, that I made a note of: implicit versus explicit messaging too.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if somebody other than me and Corbett want to talk a little bit about
that. But then I cut her off.
No, I'm following. I don't want to go.
Well, I think like the we talk about this a lot too with families, is the subtext of not creating a meaningful intervention. What does that mean? Like what are you saying, by not drawing a line in the sand and responding, and imposing whatever so when we say consequence, we don't mean like a punitive negative thing. We just mean, some kind of meaningful response, we had this agreement, you stepped out of the lines of the agreement, and this is what we're going to do as a consequence. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
it does. And I think that what I hear, that big piece that's so important in the families we all work with, is accountability.
Right.
And it's also important for the parents that they need kids who are living at home, they learn through example. So there has to be accountability. The kids need it, but they also the parents need to step up and lead by example as well. There needs to be accountability in all avenues, because it goes hand in hand with what the rabbi was saying before too. Like, this is part of the responsibility of being a parent. And I know it's hard, and there has to be this understanding that these are the consequences, and there has to be follow through with them.
Absolutely. LaDann, that's a good point. And there's something that I think is interesting. Back to Jessie's kind of opening statement, like families will come to us and they'll be like, well, all of, so-and-so's friends are smoking and smoking pot, vaping, or drinking on the weekends. What do we expect a kid to do? And there's kind of, this, if we don't catch him, and say we know, and he doesn't get in trouble, and then he, kind of moves through life thinking this isn't an issue, and then they get to college and they're having a more difficult time with like the, increased freedom in that environment, and then graduate college, and then you got a job, and you get in trouble for showing up to work drunk, because there's never been that period of time where the parents knew, the authority figures knew, and you broke the rules and you got in trouble. And so then by the time you're in adulthood, those kind of processes aren't clear to the kid, and it becomes like way more difficult to unwind all that information in their mid-20s when they're out in the world on their own. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of it.
So why don't we answer maybe a few questions? I'm starting to feel bad because there's questions popping up, and
okay,
I'm having a hard time not responding.
And I think I want to point out just before, I think the reason Roxana asked us to participate is that between all our practices and at Peak as well, we do serve this community, like Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, West Side, Valley, like we see a range of clients. And I think there is, within certain cultures and groups, there is this assumption that, oh, it happens to other groups, it doesn't happen to us.
Yeah.
Like they do it, their friends do it, it doesn't happen to us. And we do see a very diverse group of people. And adolescents are adolescents. This is not just white kids do this. This isn't just Black kids do this. This isn't Latinx. This is like the Persian kids we work with, the Jewish kids, the Persian Jewish, like this happen. Everyone experiments, or this is affecting everyone. So I don't want this conversation, or I just want to explicitly share that this conversation, like what we see in our practices, covers everyone. It's not just a specific targeted group that we see.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, yeah, I don't want to like give any specifics about the milieu of folks that we have or see, but I think it's a very good point. Is that it's oftentimes there can be so much shame that goes along with the broaching of this topic, depending on religiously, culturally, where one finds themselves. So sometimes people feel a little isolated, within their religion or culture. And so, Corbett and I see that a lot as, folks coming in and, having waited maybe a little longer than they felt comfortable, asking for help and reaching out for help. So I think that's a really good point. And it is your friends and neighbors, it really, really is, so that's a really good point.
Point. I think that substance abuse, there's a kind of phrase that it's an equal opportunity employer, right? So I don't think it's a cultural or it's not restrictive. Like people are self-medicating, or they're kind of experimenting at early ages, regardless, and it kind of comes out or becomes explicit when there is a tragedy, and then people we kind of have to face the Anyway, so the questions, let's get into some.
So I don't want to say any folks' name out loud. I don't know if we just want to kind of protect.
Yeah, I think maybe just reading the questions and not sharing their names would be
okay.
So one of the questions
Roxanne is going to read the questions.
What signs should parents look for to recognize substance abuse? And then a second, which is how can parents tell if the child is experimenting or if it's a problem, which I think are, kind of similar in their intention. Does one of you guys want to tackle that one? So
Well,
experimentation versus problematic.
There's not one. I think this is the hard part of that. I wish there was one answer. Like once you notice this equals that, or once grades slip, this means becomes a problem. This is where the relationship between the family is so important. Like understanding the normal behaviors of your children, like what looks off. But I also want to, like, what I always say is like, what are those pink flags? Like before it gets to a red flag, which is like the grades dropping, or before, you lose a classmate, those are red flags. That's gone too far. And like kind of noticing those pink flags as they come up before it gets too serious. And that is, it looks different for every kid we see. And I say kid, but adolescent we see, but maybe Jessie and Corbett, you can kind of like.
Well, I think the parents getting to a place where they're beginning to trust their instincts, right? Like I think that, so many parents already they have a felt sense when there's a shift in their kids' mood or behavior or patterns, but we just tell ourselves like, oh, they're just, it's hormonal, they're going through puberty, but like parents have a felt sense of when these things are kind of going on with their kids, right? And so there's this fear that like, if I get into my kid's business, or if I dive in there, like they're going to get mad at me. They want, I want my kid to be independent. Your kid doesn't know how to be an adult yet. Like this is the whole part of it. Like get in there and have a clear understanding of what's happening. The world is crazy for teenagers to be growing up with the amount of information and data and access to just addictive kind of like processes. I just encourage parents to get in there, learn as much as you can about what's going on in your kid's private life, and trust your instincts.
And also monitor your impulse. I think it's really important. And one of the things that we do in working with the parents is, looking at what my drive is to avoid something at times. Like what's compelling me to maybe, like Corbett's saying, not jump into something. Is it a sense of, connection and, fear of, breaching that in some way? Is it my own fear of what, squaring off with some of these topics is going to be? There's a pretty broad scope of what might limit my desire to kind of jump into some of these topics. So there was another
one thing I just want to jump in quickly. This following to what Corbett was saying, like, get in there, absolutely, and just remember to approach it with curiosity. It's not an interrogation. You want to build this relationship. If we want to foster open communication, like, approach it with curiosity. And if you could just remember that one word, that's curiosity sounds very different than accusing someone.
Right.
That's a great point.
Really how we have to approach children, even how we have to approach one another as adults.
Yeah, it's basically the difference between my approach and Jesse's approach, right? I'm curious, I'm kind, I'm gentle. Jesse's like a cop.
But can you guys give an example of like how these parents can like talk to their teenage kids? Because I think they need some of the verbiage, like the wording to how to do that.
Well, it's funny because Corbett just said that, and I was literally, as LaDanne was speaking, I was like, well, there's also this other thing too that, like, I was like,
and I guess it does have to.
No, and you're totally right. And I think, but there's that threshold that, like, where Corbett was speaking to the intuition, and like when right? So it's not a congressional hearing. We don't need to bring data points and all this information into the room. And we talk to parents sometimes, they're like, well, I just I took down all these notes and I saw it Friday they left it, and I'm like, well, why are you doing that? Why are you working so hard? Like, if you feel it and it's most likely true. It's most likely what's going on. And then I think, LaDanne, to your point, is like, it's not an interrogation. It's not like, this intense thing. It's that conversation can be had, I think, in a very compassionate way, which is, I'm afraid, I hear what you're telling me, but I'm worried, because somebody has to be the container. The parent, it is the parent's job, to the best of their ability, to create that containment. When you're dealing with an adolescent psyche, when you're dealing with a developing young person, they can't quite figure out like where the world begins and they end, and they need containment. They need to rub up against something, an immovable object. At times that might be a principal at school. At times that might be you. At times that might be someone in their friend group that doesn't like their behavior. But if they don't hit those things earlier, like Corbett was saying, before, it becomes bigger and bigger roadblocks as life goes on, and it's harder and harder to shift that trajectory.
Jessie, while you're on this topic, so a question that came up that I think kind of goes along with this is parents talking to their kids preemptively about substance use and wanting to know how to address that when a kid, for example, responds with, oh, there are no drugs in private religious school, or I'm not going to deal with that. You don't need to worry about me. How do parents address that?
Oof, that's a good question. I don't have a great answer for that. I mean, I think, at that point, if there's some kind of breakdown in the communication, if it feels like there's not enough safety or trust, that maybe the kid feels, I would imagine, if anyone tells you there's no drugs anywhere, then I don't know, that's an eyebrow raiser to me. But, maybe looking a little bit at, what feels comfortable or safe, insofar as that discussion goes, like, is there a piece of the kid that is worried about parents' reaction? Is there a piece of, them that wants to kind of keep a little bit of that social world secret? Like, I don't want you in on all this, I think, again, that's where intuition comes in, like just kind of knowing without knowing, what some of that stuff might be about. And I think it's incumbent upon parents to have the conversation anyway, and speak their truth about what the house rules or what the family system rules are, listen, okay, I hear you, but just so you know, in this house, in this family, this is how we deal or agree on that.
Absolutely. Like, so the kid doesn't need to just kind of open up about, rarely will they just kind of open up about what's going on in school, or who, if Avi's doing this, or, LaDanne's doing, like, that doesn't need to happen. But especially with like younger kids, 13, 12, 13, 14, that are about to embark on high school in that kind of setting. Like, they need us to, like Jesse's saying, kind of be the container, and us to kind of, work our edge, test our limits, and find our way into a comfortable conversation about drugs and alcohol and what's in the limits in the house. But the kid doesn't need to. We don't need them to really kind of respond and open up and tell us everything. Like, I wouldn't expect that, at least in the beginning.
Well, that's a good. There's a question here. I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry. Go ahead.
No.
Just reiterating that, and I think it depends on what that system, what the family environment looks like.
Yeah.
And if after tonight's panel, one of the parents is like, okay, I want to start opening the conversation up in the family, that's great. And also allow some time for your child to get used to this new communication.
Mm-hmm.
Don't expect that just because you're ready to talk about it, your kid who might have had a hard day at school, who may be dealing something with a friend, is like, okay, I'm going to tell you everything.
Right.
But I think it's important that your child knows that they can come to you when they're ready to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what your intention for that first conversation should look like.
And like you said before, that conversation is not going to be reactive, right? So if they do come to you and want to bring something, then that's where the work of like, okay, I'm going to make sure I'm regulated, that I'm settled, and that this conversation is being had, because that's what they need. They need, again, that is, I think, being the container. Is they're like, this happened and I don't, and like, so you have to kind of work on receiving that in a way that is going to invite further conversation and further dialogue. Otherwise, I think that door does get shut. And there was a question, I think, kind of along these lines. When you say that parents allow it, a lot of parents believe that if a teen is using at home, it's better than using with friends. What's your advice to parents who believe in giving teens freedom at home, thinking the kids won't use outside as long as it's okay, or I okay them using at home? That's a great question. And this is something we come up against a lot. And I am biased based on what I've seen in my history.
Somebody mute me.
Yeah, you curved. So I think what I read in that question is, it's gonna happen anyway. It might as well happen under my roof. The premise, I believe, of that idea is flawed. Is that by making room for it here, it won't exist outside of here. I think in theory, it's great. In theory, it sounds wonderful, but remember, you're an adult superimposing a prefrontal cortex and executive functioning and all these things that your kid does not yet have the benefit of. So when you look at something and you bring all this benefit of rational thought and idea to it, it's really important to remember, no matter how mature, how articulate, how intelligent your kid is, they're not there yet. They don't have that thing in their head that says, I got to get up at 6:30 tomorrow and do a presentation with my boss. I should probably mellow out now and start to step. They don't have that. Doesn't make it good or bad or right or wrong. It's just not there yet. So that question to me, I think that there needs to be a more definitive rule in the house, in the family,
and I think it kind of adds to the piece that we were talking about earlier. We expect kids to experiment. We expect them to try drugs, alcohol, and then vaping out. Like, it's almost like a rite of passage. However, we also expect them to get caught and then face the consequences. And this is really how young people begin to individuate and understand the rules of society and then function within those rules. However, when we kind of take that away and we normalize this substance use in the house, we are just adding kindling onto the chance that there's going to be something else that is going to lead that kid to use substances to kind of manage maybe anxiety, social anxiety, or stress or depression. And now we've kind of told them that this is an okay way to kind of do things. And they're more likely to kind of begin to lean in that direction. And like Jessie said, if they're doing it in the house, they're absolutely going to be still doing it with their friends outside the house. We're just kind of amplifying their access to this while their brains are developing.
And furthermore, there is that subtextual and passive permission, right? So, and this is really important when we're talking about teenagers, and, you know, like they're looking for a lot of times, like it's, you know, so a lot of the stuff, a lot of the work we do is systemic and family work. And when you see two people talking past each other like that, you know, Johnny, are you allowed to drink? Yes, I am. How do you, or do your parents allow you? Yes, I do. Yes, they do. How do you know that? Well, because I drank at the house and nothing happened. So that's not a situational permission to that kid. That is a global permission. It's, again, it's not, and we see this all the time where the kids are really confused, and to be honest, with good reason, because the message is confusing. Yeah. So I would get really clear about what the message is. And one of the questions was, can you discuss how we can talk to our kids about what to do in the event that they are around drugs, alcohol, vaping, et cetera? I mean, listen, it's hard to impose upon a developing, psyche and nervous system, like some of these, I think it's just really important to talk, not to like dramatize this big outcome of it, because it's hard for a kid who's barely touched anything to hear you say, well, this could, you could be homeless and you could have all these terrible outcomes. It's like, that's not really realistic for them. They're like, well, I don't feel like that's going to happen. But, I think, talking about, the dangers of compensating for not feeling good, or being able to kind of use these things to lubricate social situations, which is another huge thing. I mean, I can remember, acutely how uncomfortable teenagedom was. It was terrible, and I think anybody, who gets something and they feel okay all of a sudden, that sounds pretty good. And that, I think, is the danger, is like reminding them that being themselves is so important and so valuable. And this takes away, you are now changing your personality by ingesting or smoking or whatever this thing, you're making yourself different. And whatever the reason may be, it feels good. Everyone's, else around me is doing it. I don't want to be the outcast. Helps me relax, whatever, the reason might be.
I think one of the questions that would be helpful, and again, everything that we're answering here, these questions are so broad, and I think every family has them, yet they're so specific because it depends on the dynamic of each family, the behavior of each child. So please know, as we answer these questions, that like there is a little bit of tailoring needed to suit the child or your family. But the last one I see is like, what steps should parents take if they think their child has a problem? And I just want to make sure like we have time to answer that one before.
No, these are great. These are great questions. I'm excited about this. LaDanne, jump in. What do we do if we've got a problem?
I think we go back to the first point, communication. Like we have, and approaching it like out of love, out of concern, and including that curiosity in there. And the concern part, I think parents also have to be very mindful of putting their feelings onto the child too much. As Corbett was saying, like the containment. If you're freaking out and if you're terrified for your child, that's not really a safe environment for your child to open up. Because then they're worried about like, oh, mom or dad is already freaking out. I'm not going to tell them this then. So be mindful of that when you want to talk about this and bring it up. Like make sure you're in the right mindset. Give yourself some time then before you go into the conversation.
Yeah, and maybe check in with somebody like a professional, maybe, or something like
Absolutely.
that. So often as adults, we have had experiences with a family member or like our best friend that had a drug or alcohol problem, and we saw something terrible kind of happen, and we'll get that spidey sense that something's going on with our kid. So we'll go through, Avi's bag, Ladan's bag, and we'll find a joint or something. And then it'll bring a lot of our old feelings up, and we'll kind of project it onto this kid. And so I think you've got a great point about kind of slowing this process down, maybe getting in touch with a professional, talking to somebody, and moving through this before, kind of leaping into the kid, under the kid and having that. But if and there were some questions here earlier about like how we begin to have these conversations. If we've already begun to have these conversations, then hopefully the verbiage is already there and the relationship has already begun to kind of be fleshed out, so that we're a little bit more ready to have the conversation if we kind of get to the point where we're pretty sure the kid does have a problem.
And I think like just talking about maybe the levels of intervention as it goes professionally,
Mm-hmm.
people kind of can understand, how we would go about treatment or what treatment might look like. So, starting at kind of the ground floor would be just individual outpatient therapy. So once a week, talking with a therapist, and I think, having some space that's maybe not a friend group and, sometimes not family can be a very supportive and very helpful, in kids processing out, some of the maladaptive behaviors that may be taking root, may not, maybe it's just an episodic thing, something happened. And beyond that is a level of care would be outpatient, which would be a little bit more robust clinical stuff. You do a few groups, a few individual sessions, things like that a week. And then beyond that would be, what's called IOP, intensive outpatient, PHP, partial hospitalization. Those are, way more dense, programming structures, which are, again, can be had, in an outpatient setting. And then from that place would be a residential setting where, the kid would go stay somewhere for generally 45 to 90 days. That would be, a treatment episode where they deal, with not only the substance use, but also, co-occurring mood disorders, trauma, things like that. And then, beyond that, if there's real lack of containment and there's really worried about safety, would be kind of a wilderness or an outdoor type program where they're able to really be contained. They're kind of under the guise of some professionals and kind of out in nature and sequestered quite a bit. And then beyond that, if you really have an immediate concern for safety or well-being, would be a psychiatric hold. That's like, really things feel super unsafe. There's immediate concerns for, intention to self-harm or worse. So those would be the levels of care. And then I think just maybe getting a consult or speaking to a professional about where you might be, because sometimes we miscalibrate. We overstep, where the line might be, or we understep depending on, perception and those experiences. So.
Something I want to mention along those lines is we're so focused on what the parents should do with their kids, with their teens, but something to also recognize is this is a tough conversation for parents to have with their kids. And oftentimes you'll find that parents have shame around it or are nervous around, I failed as a parent, I didn't do my job, I wasn't creating enough boundaries. So recognizing that, there isn't that you did what you could, and now you're stepping in to give more support to those kids, like really just taking that shame out of that. I think that's really important for the parents to know.
That's a great
modeling. Like, there's nothing better than to demonstrate to a kid, like, look, I'm human, I made a mistake, I'm owning it, or I didn't know what to do. And now I'm, I feel a little more, empowered in my decision making, and I'm acknowledging that I could have or should have done something differently, and that repair work is tremendous. And I think a great modeling experience for the kids too.
And Jesse and I see this in our with our business all the time. It's like sometimes the parent will feel there'll be a dynamic set up where the parent is to blame for everything, right? And it's like there is no like sure way into substance abuse, so it's really difficult to lay it all onto one individual in the family. And we work really hard to flush out the different dynamics in the family, whether it's like the two parents, if there's a sibling, if there's different pieces to those puzzles that we really have to move around, rather than it being just about the parent, having, maybe done something wrong or that kind of thing.
Here's a, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I just
And you go.
No, you go. A question. As an adult child of a prescription drug addict, I developed a major anti-drug policy at home. My teens are incredible and very much anti-drugs, but their friends are openly using drugs and alcohol. What advice can you give your kids to not lose friends, but also not get dragged? It's such a fine line. And part two, in high school, it's easier to control the children environment. We can't manage their environment when they go to college, which is the lion's den. What advice can you provide? Yeah, I think so. That's a great question.
Good.
And I really think, at the end of the day, the best that one can do is exactly, what this parent's talking about, which is modeling it, keeping the communication open. At some point, there's going to be, this open door of agency and choice, and there's just no, and it might be college, it might be, later in high school, it might, but I don't know that there's a quick and easy answer to that, other than, preparing, giving, I think truthful and heartfelt, input and thoughts about, substance use and, what you've seen and your experience of it. And I think preparing, kids for, how do I begin to know if it's a problem? How do I begin to know what are some of the markers, if they do, explore and, begin to, because it's, and then also, like, we know kids that have gone through all the way through college and never touched anything. And, it's not
right.
possible. The idea that is actually impossible to do is part of why we have to have these conversations, because it's almost this compulsory part of, being a young adult in this country right now, which is in and of itself, I think, a little sad.
And remembering that, like, the developmental stage that adolescents, teenagers are at is they want to fit in. That's their tribe. And from an evolutionary perspective, that's how we survived. Mm-hmm. Like, if you weren't part of a tribe, you were by yourself and you wouldn't survive. Mm-hmm. So part of when you're saying not lose, this question, asking what advice can you give your friends to not lose, your kids to not lose friends, it's also important talking about just the role identity plays. Like, who are you as a person? And that's tied to self-esteem. Mm-hmm. Drug abuse is not about the drugs. Like, it is and it isn't. Like, we have to look at who they are. And that's where therapy is very helpful, is becoming more comfortable with their identity, understanding and really owning who they are. And that kind of creates this secure foundation. So when they're in these situations with friends using, offering, or feeling left out, they can turn within and be like, okay, like, this is who I am, though. Mm-hmm. But if they don't have that identity, then it's just like, I don't know who I am. I guess I just want to be who the other people are. So the role that identity plays in all of this is really important. And I think I just bring that up with that question that, like, it's part of where they're at in life developmentally. And this is part of the work we do as humans. And this therapy can really help, is kind of get understanding who we are.
I think this parent is actually already kind of answering their own question. It sounds to me like they're actually already they've been addressing it, right? Having kind of had an anti-drug stance, and the kids have been doing well. So, and there's going to be times where it's messy for this person's kids, right? If they're not using, and some of the friendships are going to have some, there's going to be feelings, there's going to be abandonment, those things are going to happen. But if we're doing enough to help our kids have a full and kind of holistic life, they should have the tolerance, they should have the resilience to tolerate those ups and downs. And that's what we're really kind of working on building for young people. And it sounds like this parent is actually really doing a good job of those things. So,
yeah, and I think if they're going to become ostracized, to both your and Laudan's points, from their social circle as a consequence of not engaging in something, then I think maybe helping support them in like, well, what is this? What do these folks mean to you? And do they see your value, and what you're contributing, to Laudan's term, to this tribe? Because that's a little sad, if somebody wants to make a decision that's, undoubtedly in their best interest and, the healthier decision, and to have any kind of pushback or blowback from that would indicate, maybe a conversation about how sad it is that they care about these people, they have these friends, and it seems that is not reciprocated, because caring about your kid would be those friends saying, look, I respect your choice, I respect your decision,
right.
Which is important, for them to have. How should a parent deal with a child that admits pot usage, but says, don't consequence me because I'm being honest? To what extent should a parent consequence? Well, the topic, or the issue at hand, is not really the honesty per se, but talking about what the kind of culture in the family is doing, as insofar as it relates to substance use, and I guess maybe again getting clear about what the rules are in the family and the house would be a good place to start. But I think it gets a little tricky and at times manipulative if a kid starts to do this. Well, I told you the truth, you can't do anything about it. Well, not really. You actually can, and that's not a disinvitation to tell me the truth in the future. That's really just,
if we looked at it as a behavior, right, that had like a negative effect on another family member, right? So say like this is like the 13-year-old who hits an 11-year-old, right? But tells you about it, like I hurt Joey, but don't do anything because I told you about it. There's gonna be an intervention there, right? So this is, if we kind of look at substance use is harming, a member of the family, we can maybe begin to have a better, more clear conversation of how to, kind of work around the manipulation there that's being, and then also probably want to take a look at this kid's manipulative abilities, because that's a pretty good move.
But also it brings to mind the unconscious drive between unearthing some of this material. So what does it mean? I'm thinking, what does it mean that this kid brought this thing up? When you're looking at an uncontained kind of being, and then they bring something forth, there might be some meaning in that as well, which might be, hey, this thing's getting a little out of hand and I'm telling you about it. And then I think the unconscious motivation behind that is, I need you to do something.
Yeah. And then when we don't, then there's a subtext of kind of co-signing this behavior, and it's going to get a little bit more difficult to undo later on.
Oh, this is a good question. This person knows this is a good question. In today's day and age, where the street,
man,
are we allowed to say it's?
Okay.
It's no. I'll just say it's.
All right.
Anyway, in today's day and age, where the street drugs are being laced with fentanyl, and we're seeing larger numbers of overdoses, how should parents approach their children's, quote, experimental use or suspicion of use? Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Yeah, we had, well, I've got to speak more generally, but I think, we see a lot of times the tragedy that this stuff causes. We see the wreckage that these things cause. We see, you know, and I think to Noah's question is again, I think there must be an order of things. There must be a balance in containment. And I think the balance in containment, is trust, but verify, so if you've got a kid who you think something's going on with, listen, take them and have a drug test, like have them get a 12-panel test and send it to a lab and see what levels are and see what's going on. And, I think the conversation, and I think to Noah's point, it's like, it's hard sometimes, because we work with a lot of these kids and the gravity does not land on them a lot of the time. Even if they know somebody that something like this has happened to, it's still, it won't happen to me, because if you remember adolescence, you were invincible. I mean, it was really the feeling of, nothing can get to me. So that's a great question. I think it's a tough answer because
it's a great question, but I think my response is I want to walk it back. Like, I don't think kids don't usually start with fentanyl, right? I think I want to get back to Laudan's pink flags. Like, get in there, man. Like, these things aren't occurring in a bubble. It's everywhere. It's in every private school. It's in every public school. We're in West Los Angeles. Like, you just kind of fooling yourself if you don't think that your kids are bumping up against this. And so get in there and get a clear idea. And we're in this day and age where marijuana is just like socially, it's the norm. And so there's like, this is going to shift substance use, I think, in the next 10 to 15 years. And how we're going to have to figure out how to slow people's, I think, progression into harder and harder drugs. And it's that the number one kind of, I think, intervention there is for parents to get involved and begin having these conversations much earlier. And
I mean, even the potency of THC right now, I mean, it's capable of inducing psychosis with, it's not what it used to be there. So there was one question about the argument is weed is legal, it's accessible, it's not addictive, and you can't really, quote, control the individual now. What if refuses the test?
Call Jessie.
The argument is weed is legal, it's accessible, it's not addictive.
It's also legal when there's an age.
Right.
Yeah.
Not legal for 15 years.
Yeah.
So I hear that argument. And if we're going to play that game, there's.
Yeah. I think in the treatment industry, we're finding like people coming in just specifically for marijuana and they're kind of shocked at how their lives, transformed through marijuana addiction, not really taking it seriously because society and culture has told them that, just like this person stated, it's legal and it's accessible and it's not addictive. Mm-hmm. And if the kid's refusing the test, I think it's kind of safe to, kind of take that as a positive result would be my.
My favorite game to play with this, and that's probably a terrible way to term it, but is why is it so important? Why is it so important for you, kiddo, to make room for this thing in your life? Why does it matter so much? Why do you need to have space? Well, I don't need it. It's not. Do you think you have a problem with it? Of course not. Great. Okay. I don't have a problem with broccoli. As you can see, I could probably lose a couple pounds, but so I can leave broccoli out of my diet indefinitely, right? So I'm asking you with the non-problem with THC, let's just leave it out for a while since it's not a problem and it's a non-issue. Let's leave it out for a while. And then you're going to come up with all the reasons they're going to, then you can circumvent the it's legal thing. And then you're going to start having a conversation about why they actually want to keep space for it and make sure that they can, keep it in their life. And that's when it gets a little bit more real, which comes to some of the other things, if which I thought would be important to mention, because we're not really giving a lot of this conversation some really good physiological context, which I think is super, super important. And the idea of tending to and treating physiological dysregulation, so, you know, Corbett is, and I say this as one of his best friends. I hope I'm his best friend. I think he's not my best friend, but I think I'm his best friend. Is an expert in, the treatment of trauma and, in through, human physiology. So I wonder, maybe Corbett, talk a little bit about like that cycle, that pattern of, seeking regulation through external.
Yeah, I think, like as mental health treatment is kind of, I don't know, the stigma has loosened or lessened, and people have gotten more comfortable with the idea of kind of opening up about early developmental trauma, things of that nature. The science has gotten to a place where we know so much more about the nervous system and about the physical experience of the nervous system, and how I think little T's, like smaller traumas at an earlier age, can stack up and almost be more complex than like a big trauma, like a car accident or witnessing a violent attack or surviving a violent attack. But what we know is that those early developmental kind of dysregulations in the nervous system have this everlasting effect in the body and how we physically feel, more than I think that previous generations really have given it much credit for. And now we're finding, like, I think Jessie kind of described a young person, he was recalling being a teenager and acutely how painful that could be. And you take something that feels so much better, and everything is gone. It's like that is an immediate solution. So then we find ourselves in a self-medicating situation. The work that we do at Peak with the nervous systems, the somatic experiencing in particular, is helping to settle a nervous system without substances, and helping a young person, which is actually way easier to do in a younger person, because they don't have years and years and years of little T's and big T's stacked on top of each other. You get somebody young, like, it's relatively easy to renegotiate their nervous system and get it back to a place of
And I'm glad you brought that up, though. That's really important too. And the earlier it's, part of prevention and early intervention. Early intervention.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about, that the longer we go, the more gunk there is to work through. And if we can intervene at a younger age and get support for the child, then we can sift through that earlier on.
Yeah, and then those neural pathways, like, it's not this road hasn't been traveled as often for as long, which means it's a little bit easier to shift trajectory. Once you're in your early 20s, mid 20s, and you've been doing this for decades, it's a little bit trickier to to navigate that. So when you talk about the effect and the value, in my experience, and I've done this a long time, some of the hardest people to pry the substances from their hands are weed smokers. Mm-hmm. And when you take weed away, they I've worked with every.
You gotta feel everything. They all of a sudden, like, they're just like, you remove the dissociative quality from their nervous system, right? It's like, it's almost a traumatic event for that person. It's incredible.
It is. And I think a lot of times some of them are surprised, because if you look at how long THC stays in the system, it's kind of, it's there for quite a while. And I think when it really begins to kind of flush out, I think people are surprised at how they feel sometimes. And it's not nothing. And someone just said, like, is it a gateway, gateway drug? I mean, it can be, and at times it is the primary, it's all people ever do. It works perfectly, and that's what they,
Yeah, I don't think that we can pin it on one drug, right? It's usually kind of on the personality, or, like, if you have an impulsive young person, or a person who's already kind of shown the decision-making where they're willing to try riskier and riskier kind of activities, I think that's more of an indicator than actually marijuana, but.
Yeah. And Roxana's going to send some resources out as well, or not Roxana, I think we're providing it to the organizers of this panel as well.
Okay.
So parents can have some resources.
Great.
All right.
Yeah, you guys can send in your email addresses and they can send you the resources.
Perfect. Should we do, there was a couple more questions and then I will feel like we did. Are we okay to hit?
Yeah.
Dan had a time thing. I don't know if she's okay or not, but I'm happy to jump in. Can you touch on the subjects outside of the normal drugs, how kids today are using over-the-counter prescriptions, medications left at home? Recently, a TikTok challenge was to find drugs in cabinets and take the medications while recording themselves. So I am a huge, and I practice what I preach, I'm a huge anti-social media person for so many reasons. But I'm gonna not jump on that soapbox. I think it's really always prudent to know what is in your house, to know the effect that has on anybody, and to, keep it stashed, stored, safe, locked up. I don't think easy access when you have kids of any age up to whatever, there's the potential risk outweighs the value of access, in my opinion. So I think it's a pretty simple equation when it comes to abusable prescription medications. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Definitely.
And then the last one was, I have no teens now yet. As a retired educator, I stay in touch with my colleagues and the many issues facing parents. My concern is exactly what Rabbi Sakai said so well. How much supervision are parents providing over the children's screen time and choices? Are they involved in their Zooming during their lessons, or are these teens left on their own? That's a great question. Somebody else want to?
I think Zoom during school, there has to be a level of independence and trust. I mean, if it comes to the point where you've had a conversation or that instinct is telling you something is off, communicate. But I think at that age, during adolescence, if a child is in high school, for a parent to be supervising them while they're Zooming for school is very inappropriate.
Yeah, definitely.
Without some cause.
Yeah, I would imagine that the instructor maybe would pick up on something and be able to communicate with the school administration, would then get to the parent. I don't want to say I know exactly how those things work, but that would be my guess. And one thing that we find in our clinical stuff is like there will be parents kind of listening in while the teenager is having a therapy session with our clinician, which kind of makes it difficult for the trust to kind of for the kid have a safe place to talk about things like that. However, I think with this question though, absolutely, please get in there with the screen time and the social media with kids, because
social media is different than school Zoom.
When I worked at residential treatment, little Avi would get sent to residential for smoking pot, and he'd get there and be like, Avi, we're going to take your pot away from me. He'd be like, okay, fine. And then Avi, we're going to take your cell phone away from me. He's like, I'm going to kill everybody in here, man. This is not going to happen. It is very difficult. It is a hard thing to intervene on.
So I think we've gotten to most of all the questions that came through. Hopefully we answered them. I know it's not easy, and there's everyone was saying, there's so many different shades on this continuum of family culture, and the presentation and the exact kind of I think makeup of each kid, and where they come from, siblings, and all these other, there's so many pieces to it. But I think reaching out, getting some professional support, or at least consulting with a professional when it comes to some of these things, because there is a lot at stake. And if like everyone was saying, if that piece of intuition is rising up, kind of ringing the alarm bells, even if it's faint, it's really important to listen to that and honor that. And it's always okay to err on the side of caution when it comes to safety of your kids. I think it's okay. And, I think one of the biggest things we see is that parents don't feel a lot of times empowered to step in and unilaterally make these decisions. And I think we're here to tell you, as professionals and people that do this, on a daily basis, like it is okay for your kid to be uncomfortable and upset with you, creating a boundary and setting a limit. It's part of growing up. And if they don't, somebody's going to set those limits for them later, and maybe not in as compassionate a way.
And reaching out, I think what you said, it's not always waiting until your child needs to go to therapy. As we offer consulting and parent coaching. Like sometimes you don't have the language, or all these questions are so individualized as well. And there are resources out there, and we're 4 of them that, there's no rule book or recipe for this. So getting that support with trusted professionals, it's available to you. So it would be a disservice to yourself if you try to go this alone.
Yeah.
Hi, Rita.
Wow, thank you guys so much. I'm a parent of a preteen, not quite there yet, but so many great tips and information to really keep in mind, and the importance of setting up that foundation when they're younger, so that when they do reach this age, you have that open communication and are able to really step in if necessary. Thank you. To everyone who joined us here, we hope you enjoyed this informative session. This recording will be on our website, along with all of the resources that Ladan mentioned earlier. They are family resource information available for teens, also information for the panelists we have on today, and including, we will also be adding Noah Mann's information on there from last week's webinar, if you choose to, if you'd like to share that with your children. Also on our website, we have posted an interview that was released yesterday between Dr. Phil and celebrity TV relationship Dr. Laura Berman, where she speaks about the tragic passing of her 16-year-old son, who died from a drug overdose last month. And she warns on the dangers of drug access on social media. Jessie, as you were mentioning, they talk a lot actually about how even in one time, it can lead to a tragic death. So we encourage you to watch this heartbreaking yet extremely informative video. Again, that link is available on our website. These are challenging times for everyone, regardless of age, and we hope that tonight we've been able to provide you with tools and resources to start the conversation about drug use with your children. Thank you for joining us, and please be safe. Good night.
Good night. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, good night.